Hello, I'm Esther Gidhu. It's Wednesday, April 27th. This is Africa 54.
In Ethiopia, scores of children have been injured by abandoned explosives that had been left behind from the country's civil war. Armed groups linked to al-Qaida have increased attacks from Burkina Faso into neighboring Ivory Coast. And how an energy startup in Uganda is driving the mobile device charging revolution by providing portable charging stations.
Fighting in northern Ethiopia has eased, but in a far province, scores of children have been injured by an exploded ordnance that has been left behind. Clara Frank has more.
Asa Mohammed was walking to collect water near her home in Ethiopia's conflict-hit Afar region when her life changed forever. An explosion underfoot sent shrapnel tearing through her leg. Doctors removed 2 large pieces of metal, but she can no longer walk.
I went to fetch water. At the water point, I stepped on a stick and something exploded from under the stick. I fell unconscious.
Mohammed is one of a growing number of children being killed and maimed by weapons discarded in the country's civil war. Fighting in northern Ethiopia, which began in November 2020 in the Tigray region, spilled over into neighboring Afar and Amhara last year. It has eased in recent weeks with the federal government and Tigrayan regional forces declaring ceasefires. Though open combat has subsided, the danger remains. At Afar's largest hospital, children with amputated limbs lie on dirty beds. Tamar Ibrahim, head nurse for the hospital's surgical unit, said that between December and late February, when journalists visited, they received around 25 cases of injured children from unexploded ordnance or landmines per week.
Why? Because landmines are laid everywhere. People started going back to work thinking these are liberated areas, but that is where the hazards are happening.
Regional health officials say scores of children have been injured or killed by unexploded ordnance since the fighting eased in December, but did not provide an exact total. A fifth of Afar's health facilities are not functional due to the violence. Getachew Reda, a spokesman for the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, said Tigrayan forces did not use landmines and did everything possible not to leave behind unexploded ordnance. Ethiopian Health Minister Lia Tadesse said she was not aware of the incidents of children injured by unexploded ordnance or mines in Afar or other regions. The head of the federal government's humanitarian aid office and spokesman for the military did not respond to questions about injuries and death from unexploded ordnance or landmines. Clara Frank, VOA News.
A United Nations report alleges that troops in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo have committed hundreds of abuses since the authorities declared a state of siege in the troubled region nearly 1 year ago. The UN Joint Human Rights Office in Congo says government forces are responsible for at least 231 violations of rights since the emergency measures were imposed last May. The violations include attacks on protected people and places, abduction, recruitment and use of children, as well as sexual violence and torture. The Democratic Republic of Congo has kicked off Ebola vaccinations to battle an outbreak in the northwest city of Bandaka, according to the World Health Organization. Around 200 doses of the RVSV's above Ebola vaccine have been shipped to Bandaka from the eastern city of Goma, with more to be delivered in coming days, according to the WHO. So far, 233 contacts have been identified and are being monitored. 3 vaccination teams are on the ground and are focusing on reaching all people at high risk. VOA Lingala language reporter Fatou Kalala tells us about an interview she did with a doctor involved in the DRC vaccination program.
With the outbreak of Ebola in the DRC, in the city of Ouangata and Mbandaka, today they started to vaccinate people. They are using Erzebov as a vaccine. Dr. Vital Mondonge, that I spoke to, is an epidemiologist with the WHO. He says they are willing to vaccinate more than that, more than 283. With the help of the Health Ministry of DRC, MSF, UNICEF, and CDC, they are getting to those who were in contact with the two deaths. He says in the past, people were hesitant to get the vaccine, but today, as he says, today everybody that they get to, they are willing to get the vaccine. I think they did a good job in advising people, telling them that the vaccine is good for them. They have to accept it so that they can save lives.
The Democratic Republic of Congo has previously endured 13 previous Ebola outbreaks, the latest in 2018 to 2020 in the east of the country that killed more than 2,000 people. Armed groups linked to al-Qaida are increasing their attacks from Burkina Faso into neighboring Ivory Coast. Authorities in Ivory Coast say 13 cross-border attacks in the past year have spurred its efforts to prevent militants from recruiting jobless youth. Henry Wilkins reports.
The Basilica of Our Lady of Peace in Ivory Coast's capital, Yamoussoukro, was built in part to memorialise former President Félix Houphouët-Boigny. For many Ivorians, his 33-year rule represented a period of stability. After his death, the conflict between North and South split the country in two until 2009. Today, once again, armed groups in the north, this time linked to al-Qaida and Islamic State, are carrying out attacks. Father Frank Alatin is the rector of the Basilica. He told VOA peace is an essential part of Ivory Coast culture.
If you want peace, you should prepare war. And our first president, Félix Houphouët-Boigny, thought otherwise. For him, if you want peace, you should prepare for peace. And the way of preparing peace is working on the mind, the heart of people.
In January, the Ivorian government announced it would spend $55 million on a job creation program to win the hearts and minds of young, unemployed men in the north who they say are more vulnerable to recruitment by terror groups.
The government analysed the situation and understood that it was necessary to provide an economic response, a social response to this phenomenon. You can't just come with armoured tanks, you can't just come with a military force just to fight terrorism.
In the northern town of Congo, close to where attacks have taken place since 2020, young men struggle to find work. Basina Kanate is a 25-year-old tailor who opens his shop every day, even though customers rarely come anymore.
For me, there is not enough work here. I say this because it is true that there are many people who went to school, but as soon as they get their baccalaureate, they go to look for work elsewhere, because there is no work here.
Samu Bashiate says he is unemployed.
I didn't go to school. I went to a Korean school and then I learned to drive from the truck drivers. There's really no work. We are just waiting for the cement or cashew truck to arrive so we can go and help unload and get some money.
Meanwhile, analysts say terror groups offer incentives to young recruits.
In the north, young people are recruited for money. They are offered money, motorbikes and sometimes even plots of land for cultivation. Especially for poverty-stricken populations, these are extremely important things.
Évidemment, devant des populations paupérisées, ce sont des choses extrêmement importantes.
As for Kanate, he says he's angry at the government.
Yes, of course I am, because if the government had set up companies and factories in the locality, young people would have had something to work with and make money.
Despite multiple requests, the government was unable to introduce VOA to beneficiaries of its job creation project, although they say the project has started. Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Congo, Ivory Coast.
Somalia's Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble is asking African Union soldiers to take over protection of its lawmakers as they pick new leadership. Roble warned police and intelligence officials not to interfere in the long overdue elections. Somalia is set to hold parliamentary elections after a long delay due to a power struggle between President Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed and Prime Minister Roble, as well as Islamist violence from the al-Shabaab terrorist group. Somalia's election had been scheduled for a year ago, but were delayed when President Mohamed tried to extend his 4-year term by 2 years, a move that was thwarted by Parliament. For more insight on the upcoming Somalia elections, I'm joined by VOA senior Somali editor Haroon Maruf. Haroon, welcome back to Africa 54.
Thank you.
Now, as we talk about elections in Somalia, there are new reports that this election may also be postponed. What more are you learning?
Yeah, today we were expecting that the Speaker of the Parliament and his 2 deputies will be elected, but there has been dispute between the President and the Prime Minister over the security of the venue. The Prime Minister, as you said, wants African Union forces to take over the security of the venue. The President is saying the police has the lead in securing the venue. And the dispute between the 2 men have been taking place for a long time. They clashed over the election. They clashed over the appointments and the firings of government officials. They have also clashed over the case of the missing spy agent who has been missing since June last year. So there is no love lost between them. But recently, as we get closer to the completion of the election, each one wanted to assert himself and impose himself on the election and the outcome. And there is a dispute over 16 MPs who are being elected from Geda region, whether they will be seated for the election of the Speaker or whether they will be left out.
Clearly a power struggle here, but who has the final say on who should be the security officials here, the African Union or the police and intelligence officers from Somalia?
Well, each one of them have their own role to play. According to the election agreements that were reached, the Prime Minister is the leader of the election. He's in charge of the election and the completion of the election. He's also in charge of the election security. But the African Union forces have also a mandate to protect the government. So if a national leader asks for their help, they are obliged to help according to their mandate. The Somali police also are there because at the end of the day, the African Union forces are in Somalia to help Somali police forces and train them, support them until they become viable and taking over their security. So each one have their own responsibilities, but how to maneuver around and hold the Speaker elections without violence, without dispute, and without interference from security forces, because after all, this is a parliamentary election, and this is the highest authority in the 3 branches of the government in Somalia. So they need to have their own
I can
election.
recall the last time I had the Prime Minister of Somalia and the President agree on anything, and I'm not talking about the ones now, even in the past. However, has the African Union responded to this request?
The African Union have not responded yet, but they do not necessarily have to respond, because at the end of the day, the area where the election is going to take place already is under the control of the African Union forces. But the concern from the Prime Minister was coming from that the Somali government forces, who are still under the control of the President, have access to the venue. So if they have access to the venue, they might interfere or they might reject some of the MPs or deny some of the MPs to access the building. And that's where his concern is coming from.
Haroon, thanks. Haroon Maruf is a senior VOA Somali editor. Sweden has extradited to Rwanda a man suspected of participating in genocide against Tutsis in 1994. Swedish authorities handed over the 50-year-old Rwandan Jean Paul Michomiza to officials of the National Public Prosecution Authority Wednesday in Kigali. According to the prosecution, Michomiza is accused of genocide crimes, complicity to commit genocide, and crimes against humanity. He allegedly committed these crimes 28 years ago when he was a student at the University of Rwanda in Butare. Still to come, how do you charge a mobile device without power? A tech guru from Uganda tells us how. We'll be right back.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linor Moudou, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
Russian energy giant Gazprom halted gas supplies Wednesday to Poland and Bulgaria. It's in a major escalation of Moscow's broader tension with the West over its invasion of Ukraine. Russia is demanding that European nations, many of which rely on Russia for large portions of energy supplies, pay for natural gas in Russia's currency, the ruble. Gazprom says that Poland and Bulgaria have not done so, and their gas supplies will be suspended. Polish and Bulgarian officials say the Gazprom move amounts to a breach of contract. Poland's prime minister says that his country's energy supplies are secure and, quote, our gas storages are 76% full. Bulgaria is almost completely reliant on Russian gas imports. Thousands of miles from Ukraine's battlefields, millions of Africans are feeling the impact as the chaos on the global commodities markets hits goods like palm oil. David Doyle explains.
Thousands of miles from Ukraine's battlefield, Jennifer Belem is frying bean cakes. She may be far from the conflict, but her stall in Ivory Coast's commercial capital, Abidjan, is not immune to its impact. The war has wreaked havoc on global commodities markets. And for 35-year-old Belem, that's meant the price of palm oil, one of her biggest business costs, has skyrocketed.
Customers complain that the cake has become smaller than before, but we also try to make them understand that it's not our fault. The market has become expensive. We can't buy oil. It's really become difficult.
Palm oil is ubiquitous in African cooking. The continent imported over 7.7 million tons in 2019, according to the most recent data from the Food and Agriculture Organization. And the tropical commodity is not produced in Russia or Ukraine. Belem's predicament is an illustration of how shockwaves have rippled through an intricately interconnected global economy. One factor is that Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which Moscow calls a special military operation, effectively removed a huge share of sunflower oil exports. The two countries account for more than half of global supply. 30 miles east of where Belem sells her fried bean cakes, Sylvain Cho is inspecting palm seeds. He's the deputy general manager at this palm oil mill and says the shortage of sunflower oil means people are migrating to palm.
And if demand becomes even higher, it's clear that there will be a further increase in the price of crude palm oil. The other problem is that this conflict may cause problems with the availability of fertilizers and therefore ultimately reduce productivity on the plantations.
Ivory Coast happens to be a net exporter of palm oil. But Uncho says that hasn't shielded Ivorian consumers against the whims of the international market.
When there's an increase there is systematically an increase on the local market.
Tens of millions of Africans have already been pushed into extreme poverty by the global health crisis. Any change in prices presents many on the continent, like Belem, with difficult calculations. For her, a 25-litre jug of palm oil has risen in price by more than 30%, and further hikes are expected. Her income, she says, has been cut in half.
That was David Doyle of Reuters reporting. It's time for our technology segment, and joining us now is our tech reporter, Paul Ndiho. Hello, Paul.
Thank you, Esther. How do you charge a cell phone or a mobile device when you don't have electricity? Or even more, if you are entirely off the grid? Now, in Uganda, ChargeCore Technologies is an energy startup driving mobile device charging revolution by providing portable charging solutions. For more insight, I spoke to Jeffrey Mutabazi, CEO and founder of ChargeCore, based in Kampala, Uganda. Welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you so much, Paul.
You are one of the rising stars when it comes to innovation, especially in the area of energy. You're coming up with solutions that are geared towards helping people charge their phones, charge their laptops. What is it that you've done this far?
Starting out, I used to face challenges charging my phone. And while in the field, while at meetings, and I decided to solve the problem for my, and ended up coming up with a lot more solutions for the same problem, charging. So far, we've built a whole suite of energy solutions, including portable power banks like this. We've built portable power stations, and we're also building other solutions that basically charge devices. So we're also building an electric bicycle line, and basically to give you bicycles that are built for purpose. So if you commute, can we build a bicycle that can last your whole day of commute, instead of trying to give you a bicycle that will run several days and needs either larger charging infrastructure. So we're trying to innovate around different products and find that people can use them easier, and people can access energy much faster and cheaper.
You spoke about how it started off with you. You had issues charging your phone, your laptop, and you decided to come up with a solution to that problem. But perhaps there are those people who say that's like a drop in the ocean. There are so many things that could be done in that space, but not much is being done. So what is it that you're doing that can help maybe bridge that gap?
For example, in Africa, we have a lot of blackouts, depending on the country you're in. But in Nigeria, they could last days or even hours. In Uganda, they could be about 2, 3, 5 hours at most. But these blackouts do happen, either because of infrastructure challenges or supply challenges.
When you talk about a power bank, what are you talking about? Is it, how big is it? And in terms of cost, how much does it cost for an ordinary person to purchase one of those?
They're about this small, and you basically plug them in directly into the phone. They cost about $8 or 30,000 Uganda shillings. And they are basically being sold in retail or distributed through different distribution partners.
Let me do a quick follow-up on the cost issue. You said that it costs about $8 or 30,000 Ugandan shillings. How many people can afford that?
In the urban areas, you find that most of the affluent mobile phone users and active mobile phone users particularly are iPhone users, right? So you have an iPhone user who, if he was to buy a power bank, he can actually afford to pay $30,000 for a power bank. And we're basically using the high-end customers to pay for the development cost of the power bank, right? Because their need is much greater. You want to use your Snapchat, you want to log into a Zoom call, you want to pay for something using digital payments. Now, for the rural areas, what we've managed to do is we're partnering with a number of companies that are going to basically subsidize and distribute these devices, these power banks, to their customers.
How about when it comes to manufacturing? Do you manufacture these products in Uganda? Who funds you to do this?
We design the products in Uganda, but we manufacture from Asia. Why? Because it's a mass market product that we cannot really manufacture at scale locally. But our goal, of course, is to wean ourselves off the foreign manufacturing and bring that production in-house. We are increasingly getting to that breaking point where we are sacrificing scaling for sustainability.
Thank you so much for your time.
It's been really good having this discussion with you. I'm really hoping that Voice of America definitely becomes one of our customers.
By doing this, we are supporting you.
Definitely.
That was Jeffrey Mutabazi, CEO and co-founder ChargeCo in Kampala, Uganda. And that's today's Tech Report. Back to you, Esther.
Paul, thanks. Be sure to join Paul Ndiho every Wednesday for the Africa 54 Tech Report. The theme for World Press Freedom 2022 is Journalism Under Digital Siege. As the day approaches, we are spotlighting select countries and how they rank on the World Press Freedom Index. Today, John Tanza, host and managing editor, VOA South Sudan in Focus, tells us about the state of press freedom in Sudan and South Sudan.
The media environment in South Sudan is under siege. It has continuously been under siege since the country got its independence in 2011. When I say under siege, I mean there's a lot of, if you like, government interference in the work of journalists. The ranking for 2021 done by the Journalists Without Borders ranked South Sudan 139 out of 180 countries. That ranking is not good, but if you want to look at the critical issues in the country, the journalists are censoring themselves. They are not allowed to interview people who are sitting on the fence. You know, various groups in South Sudan signed peace agreement. There are groups that are still outside the country. And so the government does not want journalists to talk to those kind of groups. And in the process of doing that, journalists are not able to balance their story. They will self-censor. There is political interference. The government has its own media authority group, which comes on, which is policing the media, if you like. And there's lack of access to information. Journalists are not able to balance their stories. Officials are not available most of the time to give the side of the story of the government.
That was John Tanza, host and managing editor of VOA's South Sudan in Focus radio program. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our new Facebook page, facebook.com/VOA Africa. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.